Evan Miller never thought kindness could turn into a weakness. He always believed helping people made the world better, even if it cost him something. But the day he met Clara Hayes, he didn't realize he was stepping into the biggest mistake of his life. He first saw her at a small diner near his garage. She sat alone in a booth, stirring a cup of coffee that looked more like water. Her eyes were tired, her clothes were worn, but there was something gentle about her. When the waiter told her her card had declined, she looked so embarrassed that Evan felt a pull inside his chest. Before he even thought about it, he walked over and paid for her meal. She thanked him with a soft smile that made him feel like he'd done something meaningful. From that moment, Clara became a quiet presence in his life. She told him she had moved to Ohio recently and was trying to start fresh after a series of unlucky events. She didn't go into much detail at first, just hinted at family issues, money problems, and a long history of people letting her down. Evan didn't need details. He wanted to help. It was something natural for him, something automatic. They started meeting more often. Sometimes at the diner, sometimes outside the garage while he worked. She would bring him water or sit nearby and talk about simple things. Music she liked, places she wished she could visit, the little dreams she kept hidden. Evan liked listening to her. She made him feel needed, like he was someone who could make a difference. One evening, as they watched the sun dip behind the buildings, Clara suddenly opened up. She told him she had no real support system, no savings, and no one she could trust. Her voice cracked, and she looked away like she was ashamed of her life. Evan felt his chest tighten. He didn't see a manipulator. He saw a woman who had been hurt too many times. He promised her that things would get better. He didn't say it because he had money or power. He said it because he genuinely believed it. He believed that with the right person beside her, she could rebuild everything she lost. And he wanted to be that person. Clara smiled. A small, grateful smile that made him think he had done something right. It felt good. It felt honest. It felt like the start of something meaningful. Evan didn't know it yet, but that moment was the first step into the trap. Everything seemed genuine, gentle, and real. He couldn't see the truth behind her stories or the mask she wore so easily. He couldn't imagine that the woman he wanted to protect would be the same woman who would break him in ways he never thought possible. But for now, all he felt was hope. And sometimes, hope is the most dangerous feeling of all. Clara's stories began slowly, almost like she was afraid to say too much. One night while they were sitting in Evan's living room, she shared a piece of her past that made him fall even deeper into his role as her protector. She talked about growing up in a home where arguments never stopped, where she never felt safe, and where nobody cared enough to stay. She said she bounced between relatives, shelters, and cheap rentals all through her early 20s. Her voice stayed soft, never dramatic, but each detail made Evan feel something heavy settle in his chest. He believed her completely. He didn't question why she never mentioned friends, why no one ever checked on her, or why every part of her life sounded like a disaster. He just wanted to make things easier for her. Clara's problems started showing up one by one. First, she said she was behind on rent and her landlord was threatening to kick her out. Evan didn't think twice, he handed her the money. Then she told him she had an unpaid medical bill from years ago that had gone into collections. Evan cleared it because he didn't want her credit to get worse. Soon after, she mentioned overdue utility bills, grocery shortages, and a credit card debt she claimed she opened when she was too young to understand interest rates. Every time she shared something, she did it with guilt in her eyes, like she hated needing anyone. Evan always reassured her. He told her she deserved help. He convinced himself that anyone in her situation would struggle. His friends noticed the changes first. They saw how tired he looked and how often he said he couldn't hang out because Clara needed something. When he mentioned paying some of her bills, they warned him she might be using him. One friend even said Clara's stories sounded like she knew exactly how to pull sympathy out of people. But Evan shut all of them down. He told them they didn't know her like he did, and he hated how judgmental they sounded. Not long after, Clara told Evan she had nowhere else to go. She said she could try to find another place, but she didn't want to whine about how hard it would be. Evan insisted she move in with him. He thought living together would finally give her stability. He wanted her to feel safe for the first time in her life. But the moment Clara settled into his home, everything in Evan's life started shifting. She didn't just move in, she took over. She always needed something. If he came home late, she cried because she felt abandoned. If he suggested she try finding a job, she claimed her anxiety was getting worse. If he asked about her spending habits, She accused him of treating her like a burden. Before he realized it, Evan was paying for everything. Groceries, her clothes, her appointments, her prescriptions, even random emergencies that always came up at the worst possible time. She leaned on him for every small decision. She needed constant reassurance, constant attention, constant proof that he wouldn't leave her like everyone else had. Evan told himself he was helping her heal. He didn't see that she was slowly building a world where he carried every weight, every cost, and every responsibility, while she simply received. And by the time he noticed the pattern, he was already too deep to pull himself out. Evan didn't notice the change all at once. It happened slowly, creeping into his life like something he didn't invite. At first, Clara was humble about everything. She acted grateful for even the smallest help. But after a few months of living with him, her needs began to look different, bigger, sharper, and harder to ignore. She came home one afternoon with a designer handbag that Evan knew wasn't cheap. When he asked about it, she said it was on sale and she deserved something nice for once. The same week, she booked an expensive salon appointment, telling him she needed to feel confident again. She talked about self-care like it was a necessity, not a luxury. She always had an explanation ready, and every explanation came with a sad expression that made Evan feel like he was hurting her by even asking. Then came the weekend trips. Clara said she needed short mental reset retreats because of her past trauma, and she chose places Evan couldn't afford, not without dipping into his savings. She never asked directly. She simply hinted at how overwhelmed she felt. Evan would end up paying because he didn't want her stress to get worse. And every time he hesitated, she cried. She made him feel like questioning her meant he didn't care. The more he paid, the more she expected. Her taste shifted from basic necessities to high-end clothing, new skincare products, and fancy restaurant meals she claimed helped her feel normal. Evan kept telling himself that healing sometimes cost money, that Clara just needed time. But his savings account told a different story. Money he took years to save disappeared in months. He found himself putting off repairs on his truck and skipping meals just to make sure Clara wouldn't feel deprived. When he tried to bring up the bills piling up, she reminded him of her medical issues. Problems that never seemed to have clear diagnoses, yet kept her from working. She always turned the conversation around until he felt selfish for bringing it up at all. What bothered him more was the shift in her behavior. In the beginning, she had been warm and gentle. Now she was distant whenever he couldn't immediately give her what she wanted. She smiled less. She touched him less. She spoke to him like he was just another obligation she had to tolerate. Evan tried to ignore the sinking feeling inside him. His gut kept telling him something wasn't right, that the woman he tried so hard to help wasn't the same woman standing in front of him now. But every time he thought about confronting her, he remembered her tears, her stories of being abandoned, the way she said he was the only person she trusted. His heart refused to believe she would hurt him. So he pushed the doubts away, convinced himself it was just a rough phase, and kept trying to provide everything she asked for. He didn't want to accept that he might be pouring everything he had into someone who didn't truly care. But deep down, the truth was already taking shape, quiet, heavy, and impossible to ignore for much longer. Evan wasn't looking for trouble that morning. He was cleaning the kitchen, sorting mail, and trying to figure out how to stretch what little money he had left until the next paycheck. Clara had left 2 days earlier, saying she needed to visit her aunt who had fallen sick again. Evan didn't question it. He even packed her snacks and slipped some cash into her bag because she said she didn't want to burden him further. While throwing out old receipts, one piece of paper caught his eye, a hotel charge from the very weekend she was supposed to be away. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Maybe the charge was old. Maybe it wasn't hers. But when he looked closer, he saw the date clearly printed, along with a room upgrade fee and a note about 2 guests. His stomach tightened. He waited until Clara returned. She walked in casually, complaining about the long bus ride and how exhausted she was from helping her aunt. Evan listened quietly, holding the receipt in his pocket, trying to steady himself. When she finally settled on the couch, he gently asked if everything went okay on her trip. She said yes, everything was tiring but fine. Then Evan took out the receipt and placed it on the table. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He just asked her to explain. Clara's reaction was immediate and intense. Her eyes widened, her voice broke, and she began crying so loudly it echoed through the house. She said she couldn't believe he would question her integrity after everything she'd been through. She said he was becoming controlling, paranoid, and ungrateful for her presence in his life. She turned it around so fast that Evan felt confused, even guilty, as if he really had done something wrong. Every time he tried to ask calmly, she twisted his words. She said he didn't trust her, that he was hurting her, that he didn't understand how much pain she already carried. After half an hour of her crying and shaking, Evan found himself apologizing. He comforted her, told her he believed her, and blamed the confusion on the hotel. Clara hugged him tightly, like she was forgiving him. She said she was going to take a shower and try to calm down. Evan sat alone on the couch, staring at the receipt, still unsure but too drained to push any further. That night, around 10 p.m., his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. When he answered, a polite voice introduced himself as the hotel manager. He said they were calling because Clara had left a card behind, and since Evan's card was on file for the room, they were confirming where to send it. Evan felt his chest freeze. He asked casually, "Was she alone during her stay?" The manager replied without hesitation, "No, sir, she checked in with a gentleman. They seemed like a couple. Very kind people." The words hit Evan like a punch. Everything around him felt distant, the room, the phone, even his own breath. In that moment, everything he tried to ignore became impossible to deny. Clara hadn't just lied. She had used him, and betrayed him in the most intimate way. And the truth was only beginning to unfold. Evan didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark, replaying the call from the hotel manager over and over. A part of him still wanted to believe there was some explanation, but the rest of him finally understood that something was deeply wrong. He needed to know the truth, even if it hurt. The next morning, while Clara was still asleep, Evan quietly went through the bank statements linked to the card she always used. He had never checked them before because he trusted her completely. Now, every line felt like a punch to the gut. There were charges for restaurants he had never visited, salons he had never heard of, and multiple spa sessions far more expensive than she ever told him about. But what caught his attention were the repeated payments for a certain fitness center. His heart sank as he remembered Clara mentioning a free spa day months ago, one he had paid for without realizing. That was the same day she told him she met some friendly staff who made her feel comfortable. At the time, he thought nothing of it. Now, it felt like the starting point of something he was never meant to see. He drove to the spa, pretending to be a curious new customer. He asked a few casual questions, trying to act natural. It didn't take long before one of the employees recognized Clara's picture on Evan's phone. She mentioned how Clara often came in with a trainer named Derek Lawson. Evan felt the ground shift under him as the girl added that they always looked close, not in a professional way. Evan didn't know Derek, but the name followed him home like a shadow. He searched, asked around, and eventually found Derek's social media page. Not because he wanted to stalk him, but because he needed confirmation. Derek was a gym trainer at a popular fitness center, fit and confident, with the kind of charm that made people feel seen. Evan scrolled through Derek's public photos until he found one from a weekend retreat. Clara wasn't in the picture, but the location and date matched the hotel receipt. His chest tightened. The pieces began forming a picture too painful to accept. When Evan checked past statements again, he noticed something new. Charges for hotel rooms, expensive dinners, and even jewelry he never received. All of them lined up with days Clara had claimed to be stressed, sick, visiting family, or needing time alone. Evan kept digging, and the truth grew darker. Through a coworker who happened to know someone at the spa, Evan learned Clara had a reputation long before she met him. She wasn't a helpless woman with a tragic past. She had done this before, more than once. She targeted men who were kind, patient, and generous. She created emotional stories that made her look fragile. She made people feel protective. And once they opened their wallets, she took everything she could until they had nothing left. Evan realized he wasn't special to her. He was simply the next source of money. The worst part wasn't the money. It wasn't the lies. It wasn't even Derek. It was knowing every tear she cried, every tremble in her voice, every moment she clung to him when she said she felt safe. None of it was real. She had studied him, read him, and played him with precision. His savings funded her trips with Derek. His kindness paid for their dates. His trust allowed her to build a double life right under his roof. The woman he loved had never loved him back. She had only loved what he could give. And now, for the first time, Evan saw her clearly. Evan waited until Clara came home that evening. She walked in like nothing was wrong, humming softly, placing her purse on the counter as if the world was normal. Evan watched her silently, feeling a mixture of anger, sadness, and disbelief swirling inside him. He didn't want to fight. He didn't want more lies. He simply told her to pack her things and leave. Clara stared at him for a moment, confused. When he repeated himself, her confusion turned into annoyance, then into something worse, a mocking smile. She didn't deny anything. She didn't ask why. Instead, she laughed. A cold, sharp laugh that made Evan's skin crawl. She told him he was soft, exactly the kind of man she could shape any way she wanted. She said he was too easy to manipulate, too desperate to feel needed, too blind to see what she was doing. She even told him that men like him never find someone else because they care too much and get hurt too easily. Every word was meant to cut him deeper than the last. Evan stayed silent. He didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing him break. He simply opened the door and told her to leave. She walked out without looking back, as if she had already moved on. And in a way, she had. Evan realized she probably never saw their relationship as something real to begin with. When the door closed, the house felt painfully quiet. Evan sat down on the floor, unable to hold in the weight anymore. The betrayal hit him all at once. The money he spent, the trust he gave, the hours of comforting her, the lies he believed. He felt ashamed for not seeing the signs, ashamed for defending her, ashamed for giving so much of himself to someone who treated him like a resource, not a partner. The next few weeks were rough. His savings were almost gone. Bills piled up. He couldn't focus at work and made small mistakes he never used to make. Nights were worse. He kept replaying the moment Clara called him easy. It made him question everything about himself, his judgment, his worth, even his kindness. But slowly, something began to shift. One of his co-workers invited him to grab a burger after work. Evan almost said no, but he forced himself to go. Talking to someone who wasn't draining him felt strange at first, almost unfamiliar. His friends welcomed him back without judgment, even though he had pushed them away for months. They didn't say, "I told you so." They just listened. Evan took extra shifts to rebuild his savings. He started fixing up his truck, something he had put off for too long. Little by little, he began to feel like himself again. Not the person Clara molded him into, but the man he used to be before she entered his life. He also spent a lot of time thinking about why he let things go so far. He realized he wasn't just generous, he was afraid of disappointing people. He confused helping with sacrificing. And Clara had used that weakness with skill. The more he worked on himself, the more he understood that his kindness wasn't the problem. It was the way he gave it to someone who never deserved it. His pain didn't vanish, but it didn't control him anymore. It started turning into something else, strength, clarity, and a quiet determination not to fall into the same trap again. Clara had taken so much from him, but she had also exposed the parts of himself he needed to fix. And that was the first step in his rise back to the life he almost lost. Evan didn't expect his life to shift again. Months had passed since Clara left, and he had finally built a routine that felt steady. He worked long hours, saved slowly, and kept mostly to himself. Some nights he stopped by a quiet bar near his workplace just to unwind. He didn't drink much, just enough to calm the thoughts that sometimes tried to creep back in. One evening, he was sitting alone when a man at the next stool nodded at him. He looked around Evan's age, tired but friendly. They made small talk at first, work, long days, nothing personal. But everything changed when the man introduced himself as Matthew Harris. When Matthew mentioned his name, Evan froze. Clara had mentioned a Matthew once, a boyfriend who supposedly cheated, lied, and left her broken. Evan remembered feeling sorry for her when she told the story. Seeing Evan's reaction, Matthew raised an eyebrow and asked if something was wrong. Evan hesitated, then asked quietly, "Did you ever date someone named Clara Hayes?" Matthew's face changed instantly. A slow, stunned expression took over, followed by a bitter laugh. He pulled out his phone and showed a picture of Clara. Evan's chest tightened. They talked for hours. Matthew told his story first. He had been with Clara for over a year. She told him the same sad childhood stories, the same emotional wounds, the same excuses for not working. She drained his savings, ruined his credit with accounts he didn't know she opened, and left him the moment he couldn't give her anything more. He spent months picking up the pieces. Evan felt sick hearing the details. Everything Matthew said lined up with what he'd lived through. It was like Clara followed a script, one that she used on every man who tried to help her. When it was Evan's turn, he shared what happened with Derek and how Clara left him financially drained as well. Matthew listened carefully, shaking his head every few minutes. But then he leaned forward and said something that made Evan sit back in disbelief. "She's doing the same thing to Derek," Matthew said. "But worse." Evan asked how he knew. Matthew explained that he still had mutual contacts from the gym Derek worked at. Word had gotten around that Clara had moved on to trainer number 2. Derek thought he had found an amazing, delicate woman who needed him. But behind his back, Clara was using Derek's personal information, opening credit lines, making purchases under his name, and building a financial mess he wouldn't discover until it was too late. Matthew had tried warning Derek once, but Derek didn't believe him. Clara had already poisoned his mind with stories about her crazy ex, who was obsessed with ruining her life. Matthew eventually backed off, realizing Derek was in too deep to see the truth. Listening to all this, Evan felt a mix of anger and something sharper, clarity. He wasn't the only one she had used. He wasn't even the last. Clara wasn't unlucky. She wasn't broken. She was calculated. For the first time, Evan didn't feel embarrassed about what happened to him. Instead, he felt connected to someone who understood exactly how it felt. Someone who saw the same lies, the same fake tears, the same manipulation. As the night went on, the anger between them shifted into something more structured. Not revenge in a violent or illegal way, but justice. Real justice. Matthew talked about how he once collected evidence, not for revenge, but to protect himself legally. Evan realized he had receipts, bank statements, text messages, hotel charges, all showing a pattern. The idea started as a small conversation, almost a joke. But as they talked, it grew into something possible. Something fair. Something that would expose Clara for who she really was, without breaking a single law. By the time they left the bar, they exchanged numbers and shook hands. For the first time since Clara walked out of his life, Evan felt the weight in his chest change. Not disappear, but transform. He wasn't powerless anymore. He wasn't alone. And this time, he wasn't walking into a trap. He was stepping toward the truth, finally ready to confront the woman who nearly destroyed him. Evan kept his promise to stay quiet and calm, even as he carried the heavy truth inside him. Matthew helped him collect every piece of information they needed. Together they built a picture of Clara's lies, her fake documents, her patterns, her tricks. Evan didn't want to ruin her life. He just wanted the truth to finally reach the right people. So he took small, careful steps, making sure everything he did was legal and clean. When he sent Derek the documents, showing how Clara used his identity for credit lines, he did it through an anonymous email. Derek didn't believe it at first. He defended Clara the same way Evan once had. But when the bank suddenly froze his accounts, and he got calls asking about loans he never applied for, he finally realized the truth. Clara had been using him the same way she used every man before him. Evan didn't stop there. He contacted her landlord and shared the evidence of her fake employment letters and false rental documents. The landlord had been confused for months about why Clara always had excuses for late rent and sudden family emergencies. Now it all made sense. The landlord thanked Evan for telling the truth and said he would handle it from there. Matthew took responsibility for informing Clara's family. They had always believed Clara's stories about being the victim and about how everyone used her or mistreated her. But when they saw proof, screenshots, documents, dates, they finally saw the real pattern. The lies, the manipulation, the financial damage. It became clear that Clara wasn't unlucky. She was creating the chaos herself. Slowly, everything around Clara started falling apart at the same time. Derek confronted her and threw her out of his apartment, furious about the accounts opened in his name. Creditors started calling her nonstop, asking for payments she couldn't hide from anymore. Her landlord demanded answers and threatened legal action for the forged documents. Even her own family stepped back, refusing to cover for her or defend her anymore. Clara found herself completely isolated. The world she had built on lies finally cracked open, and every path she once used to escape problems was closed. Evan didn't celebrate or feel joy watching it happen. He just felt a quiet release, knowing he had finally taken control of his life again. He didn't need revenge through anger. He only needed the truth to surface. And as Clara's lies collapsed, Evan finally felt like he was stepping out of the shadows she had trapped him in. Clara's life had fallen apart from every direction, and she had nowhere left to run. When all her usual tricks failed, she did the one thing Evan never thought she would do again. She showed up at his workplace. She walked in crying loudly, her face streaked with makeup, acting as if she was the one who had been betrayed. She begged him to listen, saying she had nowhere else to go, and that he was the only person who ever truly cared about her. A few months earlier, these words would have broken Evan. He would have felt guilty, confused, and eager to fix everything, even if he wasn't the one who caused the problem. But now he felt different. He felt lighter, grounded, and finally aware of how much damage she had caused in his life. Evan stepped outside with her, not wanting a scene. He stayed calm, even when she tried to reach for his hand. She kept talking about how everyone had turned on her, how Derek misunderstood things, how her family believed lies, and how she felt totally alone. But Evan didn't let her pull him back into the cycle. He looked at her with a quiet, steady expression and told her he knew everything. Every lie, every trick, every moment she used his trust for her benefit. Clara froze for a moment, shocked that he wasn't reacting the way she expected. When she tried to deny it, he didn't argue. He simply told her he was done allowing himself to be treated like a backup plan, a wallet, or a tool for her comfort. For the first time, Clara had no words. Her tears stopped, and anger took their place. She accused him of ruining her life, of turning everyone against her, and of being ungrateful for everything she claimed she brought into his world. But Evan didn't raise his voice or defend himself. He just said that her life fell apart because of her own choices, and he refused to be part of that destruction anymore. He told her he finally valued himself enough to walk away. Clara left in a storm of shouting, furious that she no longer had control over him. She tried to make him feel guilty one last time, but he didn't let it touch him. When she finally disappeared down the street, Evan felt something he had not felt in a long time: freedom. True freedom, the kind that comes when you finally understand your worth. He went back to work with a clear mind, knowing he had closed the door not out of anger, but out of self-respect. From that moment on, Evan moved forward with a new strength. He understood that being kind didn't mean letting someone walk over him. It meant knowing when to stop giving to someone who only takes. It meant choosing peace over chaos. And as he rebuilt his life step by step, Evan realized the most powerful change wasn't in Clara's downfall. It was in his own rise. When everything finally settled, Evan found himself looking back at the past year with a mixture of sadness and clarity. He realized how deeply love had blinded him. He remembered all the moments when he ignored his own needs just to make someone else feel safe. He remembered how he believed every story, every excuse, every tear. He thought generosity was supposed to make love stronger, but with Clara, it became something she used against him. The more he gave, the more she took, and the more she took, the emptier he felt inside. Evan understood now that people like Clara didn't see kindness as a gift. They saw it as an opportunity. They took it, stretched it, and twisted it until you forgot who you were. He had allowed himself to believe that sacrifice was a sign of love, but now he knew that love wasn't supposed to drain you. It wasn't supposed to leave you broken, ashamed, and questioning your own worth. Clara's betrayal hurt him deeply, but it also woke him up to how much he had ignored his own value. As the months passed, Evan rebuilt his life slowly, but with purpose. He learned to create boundaries he never had before. He paid attention to the small signs he used to brush off. He surrounded himself with people who respected him without asking for anything in return. He saved his money, planned for his future, and made decisions that actually supported his own happiness instead of someone else's comfort. He learned that real strength wasn't in how much he could give. It was in knowing when to stop giving to the wrong person. Every now and then, the memories still hurt, but they no longer controlled him. Instead, they reminded him of how far he'd come. He understood now that betrayal, as painful as it was, had become his greatest teacher. It taught him patience, awareness, and self-respect. It taught him that not everyone who claims to need saving wants to change. Some people just want someone to pull them out of every mess they create. But Evan wasn't that person anymore. When he thought about sharing his story, he wanted others to understand one thing clearly. If someone makes you feel guilty for giving, that's not love, that's manipulation. If you feel like you're constantly fixing someone's disasters, you're not a partner, you're a lifeline they plan to cut as soon as they find a new one. He wanted people to know that walking away wasn't weakness. Sometimes it was the only way to protect your heart. Evan ended his reflection with the truth he wished he had known earlier. Not everyone you sacrifice everything for will ever try to save you back. Some people only come into your life to take what they can and leave you empty. But once you learn that, once you finally choose yourself, you become stronger than you ever thought possible. His biggest mistake became his biggest awakening, and it changed the way he would love and protect himself for the rest of his life.